the students have read the text, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, a couple times,
right.
and you've given them some guiding frameworks and strategies to help them monitor their comprehension, ask questions of the texts, and then look at the different sort of pieces, the audience, the author, the purpose of the text, and you have the tone.
Right.
Now we want them to go into the text and start breaking down really how the author makes meaning.
Exactly.
And creating an argument about the effectiveness. What do you have them look at in order to do that?
So now that, like you said with the soapstone, they have a general idea of his purpose. So then we look at, okay, well, how does he achieve it? Because I know that this writing assessment is coming up that we've talked about. So the first thing I start with is the figurative language. We review over, I want you to go back and read through the text and identify, on their sheet I give them, it talks about similes, metaphors, personification, imagery, repetition.
Okay.
And so they still have their same paper that they've been annotating on, and then on my board I've dissected off each part, a part for similes, metaphors, personifications. So students go through, first initially they identify it on their paper. They copy the phrase from the text. Then they analyze what is being discussed. So then, for example, personification, Edward says that hell has a gaping mouth for the sinners. So they could write that down and then kind of analyze what effect it has that Edwards has given hell a mouth. And then what, in return, how would that impact the audience? So they're doing these thoughts as I'm circulating the room, and I also have expo markers. So based off how our discussion has been, I choose different students to come up to the board and then write their example under each part. Getting a diversity of students, maybe students that have been kind of reluctant to talk, kind of to balance things out. And then let them then kind of share their analysis of it. And then I can then kind of prompt, well, you say that Edwards gave, hell a mouth with personification. What if hell was giving a fist that's clutching after the sinners? Would that be more impactful or less effective? So these are then the conversations we have about each of the elements of figurative language. And then I always go back to, well, how does this then help his purpose? Or what is the tone then, looking at your soapstone, the overall tone, what's the specific tone then of this passage that you've identified?
So they're writing down on their paper the example and the why he uses it and the effect of it on the audience.
Right.
They're writing on the board the actual examples, and you're asking questions, which they should be able to answer because they wrote it on their paper.
Yeah.
So they know some of them may not have an answer when you ask them about it up there. Does that ever happen?
Oh, yeah.
And then what do you do?
And I purposely, try to, take them down different avenues or based off what we're discussing, bring up things that they naturally weren't thinking about there. So then that is, originally focused on a student, and then it gets the whole class involved in it, or then allows more one-on-one time with that student to really kind of think about how I want them to think. I'm really big on teaching the thought process. Because if I can teach them how to think, they can handle a challenging text like this.
So that's where that questioning comes.
Yeah.
You're constantly asking those why questions.
Right.
How
whys and hows.
Whys and hows. One thing that I notice is you have them focus specifically on figurative language. So that's what they're reading for. And that is actually a really strong reading technique, which is reading for a purpose.
Yeah.
And as a teacher, you've set a purpose. I want you to read for how he uses figurative language and how it affects the audience. Earlier, you had them read for identifying the purpose and the audience and the tone.
Yeah.
So you're giving them very clear reasons for reading. And that's something that strong readers, we do that. We say, I'm reading this because. A lot of students who struggle, they may not have a purpose. So you're kind of scaffolding them good reading practices.
Right.
So their purpose for reading was analyzing figurative language, and you've been walking them through that. What other purpose do you give them for rereading, close reading?
And then, with the text like this that is so difficult, if you give them no purpose in reading and just fully unleash it and throw everything out at once, it makes it then very daunting for them. So I go through these steps and then get to the next part, which is to looking at the rhetoric involved in it. Students are well accustomed then to figurative language, but it's the rhetoric then that's very deep level for them. So then they go back through the text to read again with this purpose like you've talked about. I give them, we go over the sheet and have a discussion about, rational appeals, logistical appeals, emotional appeals. Then they go back through and find examples of these kinds of appeals for us to then talk about. And then what they realize at that point is that those same elements could also have been figurative, which also could have been an important statement that they identified early on.
Which could have also been part of the tone.
Part of the tone. So then they really see how all of this comes together. They have a lot to say, and by the time we've fully studied Sinners, they really understand it.
Partly because they've read it.
They've read it, but
they've read
different layers.
Different layers and different reading for different purposes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And critically.
Right. Yeah, very
you've
critically.
You've given them, and we'll have an example of one of the sheets there it's actually for a different piece of text. This is for Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Right.
But you've given them a place to write it down.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just doing it, asking the questions, and then letting them just fizzle away.
Yeah.
You're forcing them to write it down.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually a strategy. It's low-stakes writing.
Mm-hmm.
We also call it writing to learn. We also call it note-taking, right?
Yeah.
A million different names for it.
Yeah.
The fact is that it's good learning practice. This is how you build knowledge, is you read, and then you reread, but you write down your thinking as you're reading, and as you're learning different things.
Right.
So you really, I think all of these tools, they could take with them to college.
Oh, yeah.
Or to a social studies class.
Exactly. The relevance of the thought process and teaching them how to think, no matter what's given to them by me, by a different teacher, different subject, different point, they're getting the skills they need to then be able to read critically and effectively on their own.
So the next question is going to be, how do we transfer the reading and the analysis they've done into a coherent piece of writing? That'll be our next video.